Evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here and thank you for being so punctual. Hope everyone is well and safe with the current situation. Everyone is really doing well. Firstly, on behalf of Bahrain Society for Training and Development, I would like to welcome you to today's session. Tonight's session actually discusses a topic that I believe is really important and was put under the ultimate test across industries and geographies. Its significance was especially revealed and highlighted, especially during the necessary drastic shift that we encountered, we forcefully encountered from interpersonal communication and towards the high reliance on technology with the recent changes with the pandemic. Our session today is titled How to Become an Agile and Emotionally Intelligent Leader, which is presented by our very well-esteemed Dr. Jamie Bushantin. Before we begin, I'd just like to briefly introduce you, Dr. Jamie, if I may. I'll give a brief introduction about her recent achievements, many to count, but we'll just highlight the main points. Dr. Jamie Bushantin was an associate professor in the Communication Studies Department at the University of North Carolina, and she's also the owner and founder of Charlotte Consultancy Solutions. A scholar, practitioner, career coach, a speaker, and a researcher, where her researches were actually published in top-tier journals. In line with our society, Dr. Bushantin actually regularly conducts training and development workshops in many topics. Some of the topics are networking, effective mentoring, negotiation, conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, which is one part that we'll be addressing today, along with leadership communication, developing a professional brand, retention strategy, generation differences in the workplace, and many more other topics. Furthermore, Dr. Bushantin has conducted many management consultancy engagements and organization-wide team building retreats. So without any further ado, thank you, Dr. Jamie, for actually joining us today and for your time and for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. The mic is all yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Latifah. I appreciate that. Warm welcome, very warm welcome. And as always, it is my distinct pleasure to work with the BTSD. I have many encounters with the organization over the years. I can't even count how many workshops I have conducted at this point, but it's always one of my greatest joys in terms of my professional life. Every time I'm in Bahrain, I usually try to connect with Munir and the BTSD to put together some sort of workshop. So I was flattered when I was invited to participate in this webinar, especially given the climate we're living in with the pandemic. As Latifah mentioned, it's definitely changed the way we do communication. It's definitely changed the way that we approach our organizational life and the way that we work with each other in our organizations. And so that kind of served as the impetus for one of my interests in looking at emotional intelligence. And I always have had an interest in this topic, but I think it's been furthered by what's been going on with this pandemic. So it's really moved me in a different direction, especially with this idea of agility. And agility is a newer concept as it relates to emotional intelligence, but I think it's even more important now because organizations have to become flexible because of all the changes that we're experiencing. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through that in today's webinar. Over the next little while, we're going to talk about what it means to be emotionally intelligent. And then the last part of it focuses more on agility, and then I'll kind of make that connection. And before we do that, we'll actually look at leadership in general, because how does all this connect back to leadership? And I know some of you on this call may or may not be in a position of leadership. Some of you may be joining this webinar to just learn more about emotional intelligence and how you can be agile in a workplace, maybe to help you move up or advance in the workplace. And others may be in a position, a supervisory position, a managerial position. And so the leadership component of this workshop, I think you'll find really interesting. We're actually going to start with that Then we'll move on to emotional intelligence and kind of end with agility. But all of it will piece together. And so you'll see I kind of come full circle with this presentation. So with that, let's move on and just talk about organizations in the 21st century in general. And this overarching question seems to be, especially right now, is why are organizations so eager to become more agile? It seems like it's this buzzword, but it's so much more than that. It really is. I mean, there have been recently a lot of books written on the topic, but far more on the topic of emotional intelligence. I think if you type in emotional intelligence into a Google search, you get like 185 million hits or something like that. So people are obviously eager to learn more about how to develop an emotionally intelligent organization, a flexible organization, a resilient organization. But why? That's the question I always ask myself. And I think that's the question that a lot of researchers and organizational members ask themselves. And I think the answer is because the marketplace, especially recently, is becoming constantly reshaped by these really powerful macro forces. We have sweeping globalization, we have groundbreaking technology. Fun fact, when it comes to technology, we are right now experiencing 100 years of technological advancement in just 5. So every 5 years, you can expect that we have accomplished 100 years worth of what we used to do before. That's how short of a time it's taking us to develop technologically. And then we have an unprecedented workforce diversity. We have relentless competition in the workplace. And then there are the real human economic game changers. We have COVID-19. We have this pandemic. These are utterly beyond our powers to predict, much less control. So those are huge issues that we're dealing with. And so what to do when you find yourself in a situation like this, as an organizational member or just organizations in general, companies need to be primed for what's referred to as Vuca. And Vuca stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, because ultimately this is what our organizations are comprised of. I mean, if you look at all those words on your screen right now, I think all of us in this room can agree that probably the organizations you work in largely are comprised of these 4 terms. And if we were in person right now, which I wish we were, because it's always much more interactive when we're in person, and I could see head nods when we're in person. But I bet some of you are kind of nodding your head, that these things exist in our companies. But if you're not sure, then you need to be primed that these things do exist. These are the basis for agility. When you have these entities existing in your organization, this is a prime opportunity for you to learn how to be agile, especially as a leader. Thriving in the modern world of work really demands it. And maybe you feel like you've already helped out your organization become more agile. Maybe you've helped flatten the hierarchy with some of your suggestions. Maybe you've introduced agile project management. Maybe you've even emphasized the need for flexibility and teamwork when you are considering the hiring process. But I want you to consider the big picture. That's always what I tell my participants in any workshop that I do, is you need to think big picture, the forest beyond the trees. And I'm much more of a macro thinker. That's how I approach all of these topics that I look into and that I research. Do people have the tools they need to cope with whatever comes next, logistically and emotionally? As you build your agile workplace, do you know what you're asking of your employees? Because if you're going to get over these 4 things, if you're going to get over VUCA and some of these really powerful forces, you're really going to need to know what you're asking of employees. And even more than that, are you setting up your employees for success, especially emotionally? And we're going to talk about kind of that emotion component in just a minute. But this is where leadership comes into play. So let's take a look at and consider some of these emerging trends that we're seeing in our organizational landscape. So what do we know about leadership? Well, we know a lot about leadership. It is the most studied phenomenon in management studies that exists, but it's also probably the least understood. And that's what that second quote refers to. There are almost as many definitions of leadership as there are persons who've attempted to define the concept. And more than 10,000 articles and books have been published on the subject of leadership. And that is counting and counting and counting. You know, we're going up and up and up. That statistic is actually relatively old. I actually need to update that statistic. It's probably more than double at this point. And you get, like emotional intelligence, you get like 200 million hits when you type in leadership into a Google search. It is just one of those phenomenon that people are just so interested in. It's been studied formally for about 130 years, and it's not going anywhere. People are excited about this topic because it's always evolving. And I can't remember if I've ever done situational leadership training with the BTSD. I may have. We've talked about these topics when I've done past programming with members of the BTSD, but the BSTD, but I don't remember if situational leadership was one of them. But what I always tell my participants, regardless of what the programming is about, is that leadership is vital. It's absolutely crucial, yet we know very little about it. And so one thing that I always ask my participants is, what characteristics are really necessary or vital to be an effective leader in today's climate? Because that's actually evolving, it's changing. And the answer is that there are numerous characteristics and traits that are necessary to be productive, to be effective in today's organizational landscape as a leader. So what I want to show you is, before we get there, before we kind of get to the nitty gritty of that, I want to take a minute and I want you to take a poll for me. So the way this works is you will just type into your phone or use your, if you have the scanner app, you could just, use the screen, put your phone up to it, or type into your website, http:/p2.gg/KAW. So either way should work, and just make sure you don't need a www or anything like that. Just enter that URL specifically. It will bring you, or it should, and let me know if it doesn't. If it doesn't bring you to the right place, I'll make sure it does. But it should bring you to a poll, and it'll ask you, what is the most important trait? In your opinion, what is the most important trait for leaders in 2021? And don't get stressed, because I know it's going to feel like you want to pick them all, or maybe you only want to pick 2 or 3, but I just want you to pick one. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that, and then I'll exit out. I'm hoping I can do this the right way on Zoom, but we'll exit out and I can actually show you the results, I hope. But you'll be able to see them on your end. You'll actually see what looks like a pie graph, and you'll be able to see what your fellow participants are actually saying about leadership. So what is the most important trait for leaders in 2021? I just muted myself. Latifa, real quick, are you able to tell me what the pie graph looks like on your end? Does it look like
yes,
people have filled it out? I just want to, before I exit out of this, I want to make sure we've had enough people fill it out.
Yes, we do have the pie chart, and it's actually continuing to refresh. Okay. So do you want to share the results?
I will share the results I'll give it another 30 seconds. Does it tell you how many participants have participated? I can't remember.
Yes, it does. 20 votes so far.
Okay. So if you guys are able to keep going, I'm going to give you another minute. If you're able to participate, and we don't need all of you to participate, and I know some of you may not have access to this, but if you could give us your vote, just so we have more. So it's looking like there are quite a few of you already in this webinar.
Just letting everyone know that that they can actually click it in the chat.
They can what?
The link is available in the chat if they just want to click on it, and it will redirect them to the page. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Okay, so then I am going to show us the results. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to see if I could pull it up. Might not let us. You know what, Latifa, are you able to share it for me?
I cannot share it on the screen though.
You can't share it. Are you not taking it on your computer?
No, but let me try. I'll give it a try.
Yeah, because I can't. I don't know why it's not. Okay, maybe if I
can do it right away.
I could also probably just go to it. I didn't think about that. It's so much easier in person when I do it. Okay, let's. Okay, I may have gotten it. Nope, I did not. Oh, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Did you get it? Because I also can pull it up.
Yeah. Up to you. Do you want me to share it?
I'll share it. We're good. Okay, just so you don't have to do the work. Okay, can everyone see that? Well, at least you can see it. Latifa, you can see that, right?
Yep, it's clear.
Perfect. Okay, so what you see here is 46% believe that leaders in 2021 think agility is the most important characteristic that's necessary for leadership. And you know, it's probably likely that folks in this webinar picked that characteristic because we're in a workshop about agility and emotional intelligence. So I'm not surprised by that response, and I appreciate that response. And the next would have been vision, and then very low numbers for authenticity, humility, intelligence, competence, and authority. You know, it's impressive that nobody picked authority. Not impressive, but I guess it's interesting that no one picked authority. And I just refreshed it. So we have 31 votes cast, but it looks like agility is still pretty much the top. I would say very close second is vision. Okay, so let's see how you all did when it comes to what the research actually says. So I'm going to bring us back, and I'm going to stop right there. Okay, so actually, let me go back here. What I'm going to show you on the next two slides is based on some research that I did. And it was done just a couple of years ago, so it's really current research. And it was based off of this study that was done by Forbes. So a couple of years ago, Forbes interviewed 100 CEOs from Fortune 500 companies all around the world. And they asked that same question: what is the most important trait that you think is vital for leadership, for effective leadership? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is a productive or effective leader, because as some of you know, people can be in really high positions of management, but they may not necessarily be a very good leader. There's more than meets the eye when it comes to leadership. If I were with you right now in person, I would draw on a whiteboard or on a flip chart paper, a piece of paper, I would draw management equals leadership, and then I would put like a cross or a slash through the equal sign, because they do not equal one another. So it asked all these leaders, and I'm saying that in quotes, people who run organizations, about what they thought. And they did give them a little bit more flexibility. They allowed them to kind of rank order, but when I duplicated and replicated the study, I just did a a little bit differently. And this wasn't meant to be super scientific, but I was curious. But before I show you my research, I want to show you the Forbes studies research. So I'm a big fan of word clouds. I just think they really grasp the whatever you're looking at. They really show in a lot of color and vividness kind of what it is that you're looking at. And so I created this for you based on their results. I didn't do any modifications to it. I just entered in all of their results into a word cloud app or word cloud software on my computer. And these are the results. And again, this is just a couple of years ago. And so if you're looking at this, some of the leadership competencies that these current CEOs report, and it's current, okay, these are current. And I also want to mention the caveat, these were mostly men and mostly white men over the age of 50, okay? Because as we know, less than 5% of women are in a position of CEO, and even less of people of color. So it was mostly white men. So please keep that in mind. And if you see the words that are the largest on this screen are the words that showed up most often in the survey. So words like confidence, words like competence, words like vision, words like knowledge, words like, social skills. But authority is on there too. Authority is relatively large. Intelligence is also relatively large, but you notice it's not emotional intelligence. It's just IQ. Omnipotent, which means, power, that's also on there. Knowledge, again, kind of coincides with intelligence. Strength. So, it's not like these are terrible words. They're pretty, I think, stock replies when you ask somebody what's necessary to be a CEO. But I was curious about what this would look like in current MBA students and MSHR students. And so interestingly enough, I actually did some research. The last few times I've been in Bahrain and here, I did a survey across my MBA and MSHR students, because as Latifa mentioned at the beginning, in her lovely introduction, I teach. I'm a college professor as well, in addition to owning my own consulting firm. And I often take trips to Bahrain to teach. And I teach at the, oh my God, the BIBF. This pandemic has made my brain turn into mush. So I teach at the BIBF, and I actually teach for DePaul University. We have a satellite location at the BIBF. And I teach MBA and MSHR students there. And so I gave them that same survey. And I also did the same here for a couple of my students, more than a couple, probably about 100 students. And in total, I had 250 students that participated in this survey, ranging in age anywhere from 23 all the way up to 50. So I had a nice age range, so keep that in mind. Equal number of women and men, all types of ethnicities and color, all backgrounds when it came to religion and socioeconomic status. So I wanted to make it as diverse as possible. And the reason I did this is because this is the next generation of leaders. And I wanted to see if there was a variance when it came to leaders before versus leaders now, who are the next generation. What does that look like? What do they think is important? And I was then going to focus my research on that. So I want to share with you the results. So the results of my study look like this, okay? And I want you to pay attention to some of the words that you see appearing with the greatest amount of frequency, based on how big they are. And pay attention to the words that are really tiny, the things that don't seem as important to students. So words like politics, not super important to the student population. Confidence, not as important. those are the smallest words. The rest of them were the words that really appeared in great frequency. So authenticity, agility, emotional intelligence, humility, empathy, etc. So we have lots of words kind of centering around this idea of humility. And I was really struck by this because it was so different than the slide previous. And I, looking at this is the slide before, and this is the slide after. And, this is a moment where I would actually, this is a time where if we were together, I would say, okay, so what do you think are the similarities and differences? And actually, I might still do that just because I think it would be nice to hear from one or two of you. So if one of you or two of you could raise your hand and let me know what you see as the biggest difference, I'd be curious, your thoughts. Does anyone have a sense of what they think is the biggest difference? And I'm looking for hand raising. Anyone want to comment? This would be the time. There are 62 of you here. Somebody's got to have an opinion. I'm trying to go through it. And you can unmute yourself. Feel free to unmute. I don't have to call on you. So if you have a comment, now's the time.
Hi, Jamie. This is Jessica Yarzenbeck. I was in your ninth communication course at Queen's University. And I got your invitation, so I was really looking forward to this. And I would say that the thing that sticks out to me most is that it seems to be more about interpersonal relationships in this one versus the previous one.
Yes.
The previous one was more about, yourself as an individual and what you bring to the table, but this new one seems to be more about the relationship.
That's right. I love that. I love that notion of the interpersonal versus kind of that intrapersonal, that self. And you being a communication student, it's not shocking that you would have picked up on that. And I love that you're here. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you're doing well. It's been a little while since I've chatted with you. So I think that's a really good observation, and Jessica's absolutely right. So if you're looking at this slide, it's very much focused on the self. What do I bring to the table? How is it all about me? Whereas the next slide, the one based on the student population, is very much focused on those interpersonal skills. But also, I think more important, what can I do for the organization? Obviously, within the organization is important as well. But how can I, focus on emotions? How can I focus on humility? How can I focus on empathy? What are the ways that we can use these characteristics to be better, to increase productivity, to increase performance, but also to make the employees feel like coming to work every day? Because I think all of us would probably be in agreement that if employees feel engaged and productive at work, they're less likely to leave their organization. And, there is a lot of research to suggest that when it comes to what you see on this screen, our new generation of leaders are starting to follow what you see on this screen. If you think about Blake Mykowski, he is the CEO of Tom's, and he's a Fortune 500 CEO, but he certainly isn't over the age of 50. He's closer to a Gen Xer. He's in his late 30s, I think he's probably in his early 40s now. So he is a younger leader, but when he started his organization, 10, 12 years ago, the reason he started this was based on a trip he had taken to Guatemala. And he was struck by how impoverished some of the communities were, that people couldn't even afford shoes. And he was so humbled by that notion that he decided to start this company. And if any of you buy the brand Tom's shoes, you would know that for every pair of shoes bought, a pair of shoes is donated to somebody in a country who needs stuff like that. And so this was based 100% on humility, empathy, having the courage to do something that would help other people. Now, yes, does he make millions of dollars? I'm sure. But, at the root of it, the motivation for creating and building an organization around this mindset is pretty remarkable. And bringing your honest self to work is what's also remarkable. And so this is really just a quick look at the similarities and differences. And I think Jessica did a nice job kind of looking at that, and really that first notion focused on themselves, kind of they're power-based, omniscient, competence-focused leaders, and there's nothing wrong with that. But now we have these more civic-minded, humble, socially responsible leaders. And I think that's one of the major differences. However, there were similarities. Both seem to value intelligence and knowledge, and both seem to value social skills. It's just that the more recent research, or the research done with my students, really, I think, did a better job of focusing on those interpersonal skills. But what we know more than anything is that today's leaders want agile organizations more than anything. And there's a strong connection between agility and emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is, in other words, the building blocks for an agile workplace. 97% of managers, leaders, and supervisors cited emotional intelligence as the most vital skill crucial to an agile workplace in a 2020 Harvard Business Review study. That was last year. 97% basically of leaders said that EI is the most vital skill to developing an agile workplace. So let's discuss that for a bit. And what we know about emotionally intelligent leaders is that the typical characteristics they're comprised of is that they are very much self-aware, they're self-disciplined, they're genuine. They're mission purposed. So like I had mentioned with Blake Mykowski as kind of the example I cited, they have a reason for doing the things that they do. And I think even more important is that they lead with their heart. They go in wanting to not necessarily try to be the nice guy, because emotional intelligence is not just about being nice, but they try to focus on how we can make our organizations and our workplaces a place that people want to be. And people want to be listened to. People want to be validated. And so when a leader or a manager or a supervisor comes to their employees from their heart, that's what you're going to get. And in the end, you'll get results from that. Another characteristic is a focus on the long term. So this isn't really a short-term gain. Emotional intelligence is focused on the long run. It is focused on, it's not about how to solve a problem now. It's focused on, let's create this culture of emotional intelligence from when you start, so just the onboarding process, all the way through the day you retire. So that just becomes indoctrinated in the bedrock of the organization, as well as you as an individual. It's about establishing connected relationships, which we've already discussed. It's about empathy. Empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to share the perspective of someone else. It's also about being adaptable, and it's about being agile, which we'll get to in just a moment. So these characteristics become very much interrelated. And when we're not being authentic, and when we're not being emotionally intelligent leaders, others around us stop being authentic and emotionally intelligent. They stop bringing their talent and energy into the workplace, and they stop using feelings to support personal work-related goals. Okay, so very much this notion that these characteristics are related and they're necessary. So this new model then of business intelligence, because we have so many types of intelligence, we have, the general sense of intelligence like IQ, we have emotional intelligence, we have social intelligence, and now we have business intelligence. Business intelligence, really think about it as being this overarching, encompassing kind of model. It treats people, markets, ideas, and organizations as unique. It treats organizations as being alive, as being inherently capable of change, of interaction, of synergy and growth. And so when you as a leader are more attuned to emotional intelligence, you're going to have more influence than others who are not. It's really this idea of when you want change to happen, sometimes people use coercion to get change, and leaders sometimes do that. I would say more like managers do that. But if you want change and you also want to be an effective leader using emotional intelligence, you'll use influence rather than coercion. So that's just an important distinction. So why is all this important? Because that bureaucratic leader, that leader that we saw 5 slides ago, that leader based on the Forbes study, they focus on exerting influence through the pursuit of power and control. And again, it's not a bad thing. I'm not trying to say it's always a bad thing, but the emotionally intelligent leader is more inner focused, and they can focus then and access a much greater range of competencies, which then allows them to create a form of influence. And this influence in a workplace for employees is very, very, very powerful. So let's talk a little bit more about emotional intelligence specifically and what that looks like. And this is just kind of a quote by Aristotle that I really, really enjoy. And so I had to share it with you. So anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree at the right time for the right purpose and in the right way, that's not easy. This is a famous quote by Aristotle, one that I live by. That's what emotional intelligence looks at. That's what, the bedrock of emotional intelligence really is being able to distinguish how and what emotions to use with other people, whether it's people you work with, whether it's people you live with, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's a friend or companion. It is really just knowing the difference. And so this is just kind of a break for you at this moment. Just, at this time, I just want you to think about someone you loved being with when you were young. I don't want you to think about it as a parent, but maybe a grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, a teacher, somebody who you considered a role model. When you were with this person, what did they do that you liked so much? How did it make you feel? I want you to really think about this person's attitudes. I want you to think about this person's behavior. You can think about their emotions. And if you could, I would appreciate even just a few of you, if you're comfortable sharing short responses in the chat box, just so I can get a conversation going with the next slide. Only if you're comfortable. And like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I do want you to just take a minute, pause, and think about somebody from when you were young that you just loved. Like I said, for me, it was a teacher that had a really just motivating impact on me that I still think about today. And I know how I felt when I was with that person. And I know what I liked so much about that person. So if you could just write down some emotions you felt, how did they make you feel? What did they do? What is it that they did? Did they listen to you? Did they make you feel valued? Did they take you places? So just take a minute. And then if you are able, write something in our chat box. And Sarah Abdin, I hope I'm not butchering your name. I just saw your comment about the difference between those two research studies about the CEOs focusing on power, but MBA focusing on personal elements. Very similar to what Jessica said as well. So you guys, you two are very, very closely aligned. And I definitely agree with you, Sarah. That power-based lens that those CEOs, I think, operate by is very clear. And I think we could all agree on that for sure. So we're getting some responses in.
We are.
Biology teacher, some friends, teachers, grandmother. Grandmothers are the best. They always have words of wisdom. They always have a way of making you feel good. And the reason I'm doing this exercise is because I know this, webinar is about being emotionally intelligent, really as it relates to the workplace, but being emotionally intelligent is something you should be doing all of the time. And when you can learn it from people in your past. And that's one thing I want you to know about emotional intelligence, is that it's not stable. It's something that can be learned, absolutely learned. It's not something you're born with and you can't ever get it back. It's something that can be learned. And that's why we're here today. So Monier said football coach. Oh, I'll have to hear more about that at some point. My teacher, a lot of teachers. And teachers really do have a way. I get that all the time when I've done a similar presentation. Okay, I'm going to give you just another minute or so. And then we'll move on. And I like some of the words that you're using: motivator, creative, knowledge, confidence. It felt great to be their student. I like that. Turning negative situations to positive. Actually, Salman, I think you'll appreciate something I have to say a little bit later in the presentation about that. Being able to take a negative situation and turn it into a positive. It's kind of a piece of advice I have the last part of this presentation when I offer some suggestions for how to develop agility and emotional intelligence. And that's one of the ways. So Salman, I think you'll appreciate that. Oh God, Latifa, don't tell me things like that. We started a little late. Don't I get more time?
Into consideration already.
Oh, it was at 35 or 37. Okay, 20 minutes. I have 20 minutes on mine. Okay, we'll try. Okay, so what I'm seeing is support, good listener, respect, being fair. I felt like I was listened to. So do you see your answers on these lists? The person listened to me. They believed in me. They challenged me. They trusted and respected me. I was given full attention, and they also treated me as an equal. And then by default, these things make you feel special, valued, confident, cared for, supported, and enthused and self-belief, etc. So what would people say about you? How do you make people feel? That's the ultimate question. What would people say about you? So that's the question I want you to think about as we discuss this. And so we have two viewpoints about emotional intelligence. We have this notion that the traditionals say that emotions are kind of a bad thing in workplaces. They don't have a place. They distract us. They increase our vulnerability. They have the potential to cloud our judgment. They inhibit the free flow of data. And there's something that needs to be controlled. Whereas high performers, who are those that actually use emotional intelligence and pay attention to emotions in the workplace, they motivate us. They increase our confidence. They speed up our analysis. They're a really good way to build trust and to provide vital feedback, which, based on your results that you just gave me from the chat box, I think that's what I'm seeing. But this notion that emotions still need to be managed. Again, emotional intelligence is not just about being nice. And I think that is a major misconception that people have about emotional intelligence. It's that everyone is running around hugging each other and kissing each other, and it's all hearts and rainbows and butterflies and bunnies, and people singing Kumbaya in a circle with, what are those? I can't remember the name of the instrument, a tambourine. That's not what emotional intelligence looks like. It is so much more complex than that. Emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive, and express emotions in order to facilitate thinking and the capacity for how we feel. So it's recognizing your own feelings, but also recognizing those of others. It's about motivating yourself, and it's also about managing the emotions of others. So it's about recognition and it's about management in ourselves and in others. That's really kind of the best way to think about it. Recognition and management in ourselves and in others. And again, it's not just about being nice. So Daniel Goleman is kind of this guru, the person who really kind of came up with this notion of emotional intelligence about 20 years ago. And these are just some of the thousands of books that he has written or contributed to, and that people have now written on his behalf. And there are, videos that have even been constructed about this topic. So it is just one of those topics that we can't seem to get enough of. So the thing I want to mention is that there's a distinction here between emotional intelligence and IQ, because if you remember on those slides I showed you about leadership, intelligence is really important just in terms of like IQ and your intelligence quotient. That is important. That's what a lot of people think is what you're kind of born with, and you can improve your score plus or minus 5 points or so, but anything beyond that, is really difficult the older you get. Research shows that IQ can help you be successful about 20% of the time in life, but the other 80% of success depends on your emotional intelligence. Isn't that just an amazing fact when you think about it? And the reason why is it's because you have this neocortex, which is the thinking part of your brain. It's located right up here. It's the prefrontal cortex. And it's responsible for things like decision-making, perception, attention, memory. And then you have the limbic system, also known as the emotion and behavior part of the brain. People refer to it as the feeling part of the brain because it's one of the pathways where the neurotransmitter dopamine gets released, specifically in the basal ganglia. Sorry, I love neuroscience, so this is where I kind of get very much a researcher. And so there's this super highway, is the way you think about it, between that front part of your brain, the thinking part, all the way back to the emotion part. And that's how those neurotransmitters get released. That's how those emotions get released, as they cross over that super highway. And they start to send messages to the decision-making part. The emotions start to get in. Your system gets flooded with emotions whenever you're dealing with a stressful situation. You've probably all heard of flight or fight. So you're flooded with fight or flight, and that's what happens in the limbic system. Now your brain has to decide, what do I do? And so it's sending all this dopamine and neurotransmitters up to your neocortex, which is the thinking part, right? And now you have to make a decision. What do I do? I don't want to feel any of those emotions. I don't want to bring them into the foreground. It might make me look weak or timid or lacking in confidence. I might not be taken seriously. So we attempt to stop this by rejecting our feelings. And that's not always a good thing, but we've been socialized to think that it is a good thing, to believe that that's what we need to do to be successful. And that's really unfortunate, because the brain is a powerful thing and we shouldn't suppress it as much as we are. Because what we know is that there was a survey done by Wiley, who's a publishing house, and they said that 95% of respondents said that emotional intelligence is at least as important as IQ, if not more. And that 86% of people in a position of management believe that emotional intelligence is a bigger issue than it was 5 years ago. And this is more likely due to like a generational swing. We have far more people from the millennial generation working in a position in management, and they're just far more understanding and empathetic and into emotional intelligence. And so I think that that is the reason we're seeing that happen. we now have more millennials in the workplace than we do baby boomers. So all of this will change in the next couple of years, even more. And so how important is emotional intelligence? You can see some of these statistics on the slide in front of you. Emotional intelligence helps us hit the bottom line, but it also helps shape the employee experience. It helps with organizational culture. It helps boost job performance, especially when everything matters. And what we know from that Harvard Business Review study that I mentioned from 2020, a couple of slides back, is that people who worked on a team where there's low emotional intelligence, this hurts productivity. And an equal percentage said that they see low emotional intelligence as something that could create a toxic culture that they don't want to be part of. So 40% of people leave when that happens. So when you think about it from that perspective, turnover becomes a huge issue. And so some of the things that you see here are really just based on some research. I don't need to, I think in the interest of time, I don't want to belabor it, but really this is just, again, showing the importance of it. It's essential when it comes to effective leadership. And we know that people with strong emotional intelligence skills are more likely to succeed than people who just have strong IQ scores. There's been research done at the Center for Creative Leadership. I've actually been part of that research that has shown that that's the primary cause of executive turnover, is that they have a deficiency in emotional intelligence. And we know that leaders who have a positive mood and attitude, they tend to interact with others in a way that results in a positive, helpful, cooperative work group. So that increases efficiency. And so it becomes really important to organization because, again, it improves satisfaction, it can help reduce turnover, it becomes a prerequisite across borders. We already talked about how it impacts different generations. And I said this earlier, emotional intelligence is something that can be mastered by everyone. And that's something that I really want you to take away from this presentation. So everyone's using it. This is not something, that I'm making up like, oh, just a couple of organizations use it. These are huge companies. It's assessed, it's accepted by so many different people. And I want to mention this, and Latifa, maybe you can make it available. I have an emotional intelligence assessment that I'm happy to share with you. I don't know if we can send it out as a PDF at the conclusion. I'm sure you have everyone on an email list somewhere, but I have an assessment that you can take that can assess your own emotional intelligence. And let me actually show you what that looks like. I already mentioned that emotional intelligence really looks at kind of self-management, other management, and just recognizing it in yourself and in others. That's kind of that first notion. So here's what that looks like. This is that quadrant. This is what emotional intelligence looks like, okay? So you have self and you have other right at the top, and then you have awareness and management. So think about this kind of as an XY axis, okay? So on the top, it's about awareness. That's the very first piece. Before we can do anything else when it comes to emotional intelligence, we first need to be aware that it even exists in ourselves and then others, and then we need to manage it. That's really the process. And so the slide before, these are the competencies of emotional intelligence. That first piece is that self-awareness. That's where it starts. This is key. It's foundational. We can't be aware of what's coming up for others if we first don't know what it looks like for us. And we certainly can't manage ourselves if we don't know what it looks like. So you may have found yourself in a situation where you have a feeling about something, that something was coming up for you, something is, you're trying to be told something, the universe may be trying to be telling you something, you couldn't quite put your finger on it, and you keep ignoring it, and then you're sorry later. That's self-awareness, and we need to be far more attuned to that, because that instinct, that intuition we have, that's what self-awareness looks like. And if we don't pay attention to it, it can come back at a point in our life later to really impact us negatively. And so tips for that would be pay attention to your physical reactions when you find yourself in a stressful situation. And I always tell people this, and this kind of sounds silly or strange, but this, I swear, this is something I do on a regular basis, is to keep a journal where you write down your behaviors, write down how you feel, write down when you're in a stressful situation, talk about it. I do this so often, and and then you come back to it later and it really, really helps. And then ask people that you're comfortable with for their constructive feedback. You know, I feel like I'm doing this, or this. Is this an accurate self-assessment? And I do this too. That's called being emotionally intelligent, knowing that you want to improve in some area, knowing that is an area for development. And that's why I said in that second bullet point, share your list with someone else. The list that you make, the areas you want to improve in, and the areas you think you're already strong in, share that list. And then we have self-confidence. Just adjust your thinking and behaviors so that they closely match those of someone who's models of that trait of self-confidence. That's why I asked you to think back to that person, that role model who was important to you all those years ago. Think about that person and have that person in mind when you're thinking about your own emotional intelligence. It'll allow you to act decisively. And then again, find someone you trust to analyze your abilities. So once you're able to do that, you can then move on to that self-management piece. That was awareness. Now, what do we do to actually manage ourselves? Well, it's all about control, and it's all about agility and adaptability. It's about being in the moment. And the reason I have these pictures here is because back in the 70s, they had what was called this marshmallow study, where they locked up these 4-year-old kids in a room. It was a science experiment, and that sounds really bad that they locked them up, but I don't mean that. They put them in a room without their parents, and they gave them one marshmallow on a plate, and they said, you're going to be in here for 15 minutes alone, and when we come back, if you left that marshmallow alone, if you didn't eat the marshmallow, you will be rewarded with 2 marshmallows. You're allowed to eat the one, but if you can wait and hold off and delay gratification, then we'll give you 2. And the interesting part about this study is that it was about impulse control and self-management. And what they found out, they followed these kids around for 10 or 15 years after that, some of them well into their 40s. They found that those who waited for the 2 marshmallows did an average of 210 points better on, here in the US, we have an SAT exam. It's what gets us into college. It's an entrance exam. And you probably have something similar in Bahrain. And they also do better in college. They get better jobs. They're more successful. Okay, so self-management is vital. And then obviously this goes without saying, leaders with self-management can think before taking action. They don't get angry or panic easily, and they react to any condition with a positive attitude. And I think this is what I mentioned earlier, just some of those tips is optimism. Try to take a negative thought and turn it into something positive. And this is Salman, I think you had mentioned this in that chat box, is when you face a difficult situation, write it down and write everything bad that happened. And I know that sounds really counterproductive. What I want you to do is observe how you feel and note that when you're thinking negatively in nature, your positive activity gets shortened. But when you try to flip the narrative and you start thinking about it in a positive way, positive energy starts to flow. So basically, change your thoughts from negative to positive, and then take the initiative. Take the initiative, map out steps needed to capitalize on opportunities in order to prevent significant problems. I only have 2 left, I promise. So this second piece of the puzzle, so we have self, okay? This was all self we were talking about. Now, the last 2 pieces of the emotional intelligence puzzle have to do with that social piece, so other awareness. So with other awareness or social awareness, we have empathy and organizational awareness. And it's really just about, what do you bring to other people? Are you able to notice how other people feel? Can you actually put yourself in the shoes of someone else? Understand what workers need and feel. Understand their perspective, their feelings, and beyond anything else, if I can give you another lasting tip to take with you, is to listen. Listen, listen, listen. That's really what people want. They want you to listen intently. They want you to regurgitate what they just said, so they actually feel like you heard what they said, and then validate them. Maybe even come up with a solution, do some joint problem solving with them. That's the way people truly feel validated. And then lastly, we have relationship management. Okay. So you've done all these other things. This is what emotional intelligence looks like. This is the model. Okay. You're aware of yourself. You're able to engage in your own self-management. You've recognized it in someone else. That last piece is, how do you actually go about helping someone else? How do you manage it? Well, it's through coaching and mentoring, it's through teamwork, it's through helping resolve conflict, it's through leadership, which we've talked about. And all of those other quadrants, they point here. They point to relationship management, because this is so much of where our coaching and true skills related to emotional intelligence emerge. Now, we don't have time to go through these competencies, but I'm happy to talk to you about it. After anyone who wants to stay on, I'm happy to talk about it. But it's really about, how much are you willing to stretch to be out of your comfort zone? The definition of agility is, how are you able to stretch? How willing are you to able to stretch and be flexible? And that's why agility relates so strongly to emotional intelligence. So, okay, so I know, Latifa, so here's what I want to say, Latifa. This is the last piece of that relationship management piece, is that coaching piece, and that leaders work with subordinates. They develop staff rather than tell people what to do and just delegate. They actually work with their staff. They want them to succeed. They bring them up. They don't stomp them down. And they engage in supportive behaviors. They help resolve conflicts, but they also get the person involved. And so these are just some of the tips that I had provided the group when it comes to improving those relationship management skills, is how to develop other people, regularly take time to talk to that other person about how they want to do better. This is just that coaching aspect. This is vital for leaders, managers, supervisors. Some of you on this webinar probably know how important that is. But it is really important to engage in inspirational leadership as often as you can too. And that's why some of you, I noticed, picked vision as an important trait necessary for productive leadership going forward. Vision is important, because for something to get done and to build commitment, you do need a vision. And I think if you share that with other people, it helps with that self-management piece. Okay, so I think that this was kind of like, this is what it looks like. This is kind of what emotional intelligence and agility looks like in the workplace. This is just, I picked some fictional character, a day in the life of Alicia, and just what her day would look like from 8:30 a.m. until she leaves work. And I know there's a lot on this slide, so I was just gonna let you read it for a second, but it's really just more about, how does she show up when it comes to emotional intelligence? She's using emotional intelligence and flexibility, agility really, really productively. So I wanted you to just have this in front of you. And Latifa, what I wanted to say, so while the group is reading this, I wanted to, type what I want to say to you, because I have a couple of more slides that I could show, but maybe if anyone just wants to stay on after, because I do have just a little bit more I could talk about when it comes to agility as it relates to, we've already discussed agility a little bit, but I do have just a few more connecting slides that tie back in with some tips on agility, just because it's like this new buzzword that everyone's talking about. But, I also understand the time crunch. So what do you think?
We can carry on. If you can, let's take another 5 minutes and then we'll have another 5 minutes for questions, if that's okay. So we can wrap up in 10 minutes exactly.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you've had some time to look at this slide. It's, again, really just about how does she show up? And the way she shows up, she's dynamic, she's enthusiastic, she gets out there, and she listens to people. When her teammate or her colleague is discouraged, she just pays attention, she raises questions, and she, helps him solve a problem so he can feel better about himself at the end of the day. People think she's a team player. Even when she gets bad news, she finds a way to kind of roll with the punches. And she presents a new, more efficient process. Even if people don't want to change how they do things, she reminds them of how things, when they were the way they were before, things were pretty stagnant, and they weren't going anywhere, and that isn't always a good thing. And so change is a good thing, and that's where agility really comes in. And they finally admitted she was right. But my favorite part is the last part at 4:30 p.m. She's leaving, and pretend it's like a Friday. And her boss is like, I need you to do all this work over the weekend. And she's confident, and she stands her ground and says, I'm sorry, but the weekend is my weekend. I value work-life balance. I have a family. I'm going out with friends, whatever the case may be. I'll get it done next week. And she will make it a priority, but she is going to take her weekend. And that's really where emotional intelligence and agility comes in as well. You don't need to change your entire life. You don't need to be this nice guy being taken for granted and being taken advantage of. I think a lot of people have that misconception. So she's really able to strike a chord when it comes to, we've actually already talked about that, when it comes to confidence. So really this slide was just to think about back to those competencies, those 12 competencies of emotional intelligence. I want you to think about, and we're not doing anything with this exercise. This is just me having you kind of process it. What competencies do you need to improve in when it comes to self-awareness and management and other awareness and management? Which ones are you really good at? This is what I want you to consider. And so when it comes to agility, this is that last piece. In 2016, a woman by the name of Dr. Susan David wrote this book that I highly recommend everyone get. It's called Emotional Agility. She also does TED Talks, and she's been interviewed a million times. She builds her model off of emotional intelligence. And in this book, she theorized that people become hooked by their emotions, which leads to bad decisions. And so this idea of hooked is that we tend to conflate our emotions and thoughts with our actions. And I just want to make it clear that these are not the same thing. When you're feeling undermined in a meeting, some people may think to themselves, well, you know what, I may as well just keep quiet. I'm really upset with my boss, so you know what, I'm going to have it out with her at the end of this meeting. It's when we treat our emotion as fact, and then that turns it into action, which is not a good thing. Emotions are data, they're not direction. And that's what I want you to consider, is that emotions are data, they're not direction. Who's in charge? Is the fear in charge? Is the anxiety in charge? Or is it the person? Is it you that's in charge? Is it the story or the narrative that's in charge? The person who isn't good enough? Or is it the person with so many stories who's able to contribute to the workplace? So emotions are data, they're not directions. And emotions are not always fact, but we treat them as such. This is how we get hooked. We start to think that we're an imposter or a fraud. And so because of that, we think that we must be. But we don't want to discount our thoughts and emotions because they often serve as a beacon to things that we do care about. I have yet to meet someone who's depressed who doesn't think about how to be better in this world, like a parent who's concerned with work-life balance, who at some level isn't worried and under the guilt, worried about being present. And so I think our emotions, thinking about our emotions as not being fact, but rather just data, helping us to kind of understand the situation is the best way to kind of show up at work. And when we are hooked, it can lead to negative consequences like rigidity, which plays out in our heads as I'm not cut out for this, I'm ugly. It can even lead to really negative things like biases and racism. And so with emotional agility, it's the process that allows you to be present in the moment and feeling. It allows you to change or maintain your behavior in response to the feelings in the moment. And are you noticing, everyone, that I'm using the word moment, change in the moment, so that you can live in ways that align with your intentions and values? That's what emotional agility looks like. It's that ability to flex, the process that allows you to be present in the moment and feeling, to change and maintain your behavior in response to how you actually feel in that moment. Remember, emotions are data, not fact, and so they shouldn't turn into action. But if you're able to think about them and actually process them, then they can. But they should align with your intentions of agility. And so these are the last 3 steps that I wanted to mention. This is the wrap up where the process of emotional agility is you show up. That's the first step. Just show up. Don't run away from your emotions. Face them. Ignore that voice that says, this is too hard. I'm uncomfortable. Be curious about what you're feeling and thinking. Work with those feelings. I'm not ashamed to admit that I see a therapist on a regular basis, and she always tells me, because I work through these things too, just like everyone else, agility is really important. And she always tells me, to think about my thoughts and emotions and don't think about them in relation to an action, because it shouldn't. Your thoughts should not necessarily lead to an action until you have sufficient data. And she tells me to write about them and to be curious about those thoughts and emotions. And you should learn to work with your thoughts and feelings. Recognize your patterns. Know when you're being rigid or when you have this repetitive thinking. What does it mean when you continue to think, I'm not good enough, this is hard, I'm uncomfortable? And remember that emotions and thoughts are not facts. And then step 2 is step out. Become an anthropologist. Detach yourself from your own thoughts and emotions. Name the thoughts that you have and why is it causing you to have that thought? And remember your emotion as critical data. It's data, not fact, data. Recognize that it may not be leading you to the right conclusion or action. That's where other people kind of come into play, where you might want to ask somebody else. And then lastly, walk your why. Okay? Why are these emotions coming up for you? You want to focus on your core values. These are your questions that you ask. Is my response going to serve me and my organization in the long term, but also in the short term? Will it help steer steer others in a direction that furthers our purpose? And am I stepping toward being a leader I most want to be and living the life I most want to live? And then lastly, make tweaks and move on. That's the best we can say about emotional agility, emotional intelligence, is just flexibility. That's at the end of the day, everyone. It's about flexibility. Make your small tweaks and then you move on and you try not to dwell on it too much. So I'm hoping that you take away something from this presentation and think about things that you can do that make you a more agile and more emotionally intelligent leader. Okay, thank you everyone for staying. I know we went over, so thank you. I appreciate the extra time, Latifa.
Thank you. Thank you for this really amazing formative session, Dr. Jamie. Thank you for all of your efforts. We do actually have maybe a time for one question if you'd like to address. We do have a question in the chat. If you just want to have a view at it, yeah?
Sure.
There are quite a few questions from Ms. Samira. So
Oh, yes.
Quite a few. If there is a particular question that you'd like to address, I'm not going to read them, just for you to select.
Okay.
While you decide, I just want to actually thank everyone for actually being with us. We do have also Mr. Salman who has a question. So, okay,
Yeah,
I'll
I'm
just.
happy to stay on if anyone wants to, hang on.
Hello, this is Salman.
Oh,
Yeah.
Salman,
Go ahead.
while I'm reading Samira's, I could, yeah, Salman.
Okay. Well, it's the question of culture. I mean, usually when you do an action and you're expecting the other person's emotions, for example, I wanted to say happy news, so that I would expect the other party to have a happy emotion.
Yeah.
And then not understanding the culture, it turns the opposite. So when I told him the good news, he started to cry or he started to feel upset. So the question of culture is making me a bit somehow unease. I think it's very important understanding the cultures between different peoples, if they are, I mean, from Far East or the US or from Middle East, etc. Thank you.
Oh, I totally agree, Salman. Culture plays into this in numerous ways. I can't even, and I don't know the research as well when it comes to culture and emotional intelligence. I do study culture. That's actually, I study organizational culture, but I do also study interpersonal culture. And one thing that I know is that not everyone is going to respond in the same way to what we perceive as being good news or something that is happy for us. Sometimes it's because it struck a chord with them. Sometimes it's not even about culture. Sometimes it's maybe something good is happening for you and it reminds them of something bad that's happening with them. Like you talk about a promotion you just got at work and you tell someone about it. Maybe it's a friend or a neighbor or even a former colleague, and maybe they got fired because of the pandemic. Maybe they lost their job. And so, they get upset by your success. So sometimes it may not even be about culture. When somebody doesn't match with your expectation when it comes to sharing good information, I think sometimes it has to do with, you're welcome. Sometimes it has to do with that, but more about culture. I think we do have to get a better sense of how it does impact, how emotional intelligence looks for people in the Middle East, in Europe, in the United States. But what I will say is it probably looks a lot the same. Really, it should look the same. Emotional intelligence is really about the capacity for understanding ourselves and other people, and then being able to manage ourselves and manage other people. It's about empathy. It's about being able to put ourselves into the shoes of other people. And then you work in agility into there. Emotional intelligence is just the building block for agility. And agility is about being flexible when it comes to an organization. And when you talk about it in the context of emotional intelligence, it's about being flexible with your emotions and having to shift, even if it makes you uncomfortable, taking yourself outside of your comfort zone to be what the other party needs you to be. And that should go across all the cultures, in my opinion. That should be something that isn't country specific. We should all be able to do that. And maybe that's why I haven't seen the research on it, because I think emotional intelligence, I'm sure there's something we can study when it comes to that. But I think the idea is that it's pretty transient. It's pretty cross-cultural. So I don't know, Salman, if that answered your question, but hopefully it did. Okay, Samira, I wanted to answer at least one of your questions. You have such wonderful questions. Hopefully she's still on the webinar.
Yes.
I think she is.
Yes.
Let me see. I like the question about specific industries. Samira asked if there are any specific industries that are more adaptable to shift into EQ agility as a way to work. So Yes, I can tell you the ones that are not. So local government is definitely less likely to want to make the shift. Any of those really notorious bureaucratic organizations that, you know, there's a lot of red tape and there's a lot of just policy and processes. Those are places that are going to reject it. But people in sales, usually in my experience delivering this content, I do a lot of coaching and work with organizations on emotional intelligence. I've actually been brought in as a coach to help the organization in and of itself develop this culture. I've run assessments with them. There's a really great tool that I recommend for anyone that's still here, if they're able to hear about it. It's called the DISC. It's a DISC tool, emotional, what is it called? Agile EQ. And it's all about how you can become a more agile leader in the workplace or just an agile employee. And so I've actually facilitated that with organizations and sales. A sales industry was a really good space for me to do that, because I think those types of industries just are already so flexible, they're already so open. I had, people in manufacturing weren't very interested in this. I had tried peddling the product to a couple of my former clients and they didn't seem as interested in emotional intelligence. Who else was it? Local government definitely was not. So sales, real estate, they were really interested in this stuff. And again, I think it's because real estate, they have to change on a dime. So the way you need to think about this, Samira, is if you're thinking about industries that are more likely to benefit from this, or organizations that might have an easier time, think about an organization, and maybe it's just specific to you. If you know from your own experience that this organization or this industry in the past has shown evidence of being flexible with maybe decision making or process change, well, then they might very well be open to something like this. And maybe they'd be open to a product like I said, Agile EQ by DISC. Everyone should look it up. It's DISC. I facilitate this. I'm a certified facilitator, and it's called the Agile EQ. And it's a really great tool, and it helps develop emotional intelligence. You get this really cool assessment. I've done it, like I said, I usually do it in organizations that are more flexible, but I have facilitated a new number of times, and you get this really cool report. It's 27 pages long. It's totally comprehensive and individualized just to you. It's custom. And so you get to learn about yourself, which is really cool. But that actually reminds me, I do have a free version of a different assessment. And this is what I was mentioning, Latifa, is you want to share this with the group. I do have something I'm happy to send out. And then if anyone's interested, I can talk to them. We could set up a Skype call or a Zoom call if they want a debrief of it, but happy to share that. So Samira, I hope I answered that question for you. You had such good questions. If we had more time, I would answer them all because they were so good. Do you want me to answer any more?
Samina actually has responded to the fact from her experience, technology, training, and startups would be more flexible to change.
Yeah, training, definitely. Yeah, technology, very good. I haven't run it in a technology space, but you're not wrong. I bet they would be a really good place because they are so adaptable to begin with. They have to be. Any organization that changes on a dime, that has to change quickly, those are going to be your organizations. But organizations that are stagnant, like the government or the military, those are not going to be places, unfortunately, where you're going to have a lot of luck with this tool. Unfortunately, I'm still working on it. I'm definitely still trying to get people more interested, but what are you going to do?
I guess that's true. Some organizations' processes might be the restrictives, not the lack of interest, but the processes, especially in manufacturing and other organizations, maybe.
I know. Yeah, it's so true. And this stuff is just so interesting to me. And I'm glad I'm seeing all the the comments. Thank you to everyone for your kindness. And it's always a pleasure to where am I? I'm losing everything that I had in front of me. It's always a pleasure to work with the BSTD. You know, you guys just have such great programming. So this was wonderful to be invited, as always. But yeah, but I'm happy to answer. Did anyone have anything else?
I think that would be all for the questions for today. You have actually addressed the main points also. So I guess this brings us to the end of our session for today. If there is anything to add. Okay, so in conclusion for tonight, thank you, Dr. Jamie. Thank you for your time. On behalf of BSTD board members and all the attendees, I'd really like to thank you for the thought-provoking session, the self-reflecting session. You actually have given us a lot of tips to actually self-reflect, so thank you for that. And I'd also really like to thank Mr. Munir Asroor and his committee for organizing this session and for bringing you on board. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your information, and of course, thank you for all of the attendees, for your participation, for your interaction, for your input. It's all been very valuable. And yeah, have a good night. Looking forward to meeting you again. Until then, please take care, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.